So this is week 4 of the Really Reliable Recall course, taking it to the streets or park. So we're going to start taking your recall out and about, out of your house and into the environment. So you're going to need some equipment in order to be able to do this, and you need something to put treats in. There are various different things that you can use to put treats in, and treat pouches are just one of those things. So yes, you can use a treat pouch. Things to look out for when you're choosing a treat pouch are firstly how big it is and how big you want it to be, how many treats you're going to need to put in it. Secondly, you're going to need to, some of them stay open, so some of them have a sort of, I'm not sure how to explain it, a metal clunk thing around the rim. So they say clunk closed and they clunk open, and that means that when they're open they stay open, so you can quite easily put your hand in and out and get your treats in and out. And those are quite nice. I think this one, the Mary Ray one, is one of those, and it stays open. This one, the Mary Ray one, also has a removable inner sock, so you can wash that, you can put it in the washing machine. So yeah, do have a look. I mean, just Google dog treat pouches and you'll get up a whole different variety of things, and you'll be able to choose one that you like. One disadvantage of a treat pouch, however, is that it's difficult to attach to your waistband if you wear a coat and if you're outside. So do think about where are you going to put it when you're outside, because personally I think treat pouches are great in the hall, but I don't use them when I'm out and about because I don't have anywhere to attach them. So I use these, which are screw top containers. I think these are very good because you can put them in the dishwasher, so they're very easy to wash. They're very cheap. They only cost about, I don't know, £1.20 each or something like that. You can get them from most supermarkets, so they're easy to get hold of. You can pick them up when you do a weekly shop. They fit nicely into your coat pockets, if you have nice deep coat pockets. And I suggest that if you do get these, you get at least 2 of them, and that would mean that you can have one in each pocket. And remember, because your recall treats should be extra tasty, so I suggest you have one pot for your extra tasty recall treats and the other pot for your less interesting sit and down type treats. As if you do any other training on a walk apart from recalls, you're going to need 2 containers. You might even want to get 4 containers, so that then you've always got some in the dishwasher and some clean to use. But yeah, I think these are great. Sandwich bags are not good. They tend to allow treats to get squished, especially squishy recall treats like pate just get squashed in there. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend sandwich bags at all. They're also bad for the environment, and they create rubbish, and they're not very eco-friendly. And they're difficult to use when they're in your pocket. So yeah, I don't really recommend them. So apart from the treat pouch thing, this is what you're going to need for your recall exercises from now on. You're going to need a harness. Now there are a million, billion, skrillion different kinds of harnesses, and there are equally many different shapes of dog and sizes of dog. So what I suggest you do is go to your pet shop, and any good pet shop will let you try on harnesses. So I suggest that you just go along to the pet shop and try on a few harnesses until you find one that you like and that fits your dog securely. So you need to make sure your dog can't back out of it and that it's quite snug, but not uncomfortably snug. You also need to make sure that it's not a stop-pull harness. A stop-pull harness they work in various different ways, but one way they can work is by sort of tightening underneath the dog's front legs when they're pulled, and you don't really want that. So you just want an ordinary harness that doesn't do anything when it's pulled on or anything like that, so it's just an ordinary harness, not a stop-pull harness. Yeah, so harness and a long line. Now, the long line thing we have to be a little bit more specific on, so you can't just go out and buy any old long line. It has to be 10 meters or 30 foot long, and you have to consider the material. So is the material absorbent or too absorbent? So when it's wet, is it going to absorb all the water from the puddles that your dog pulls it through? Does fauna get attached to it? So is it made of a material which you get twigs and leaves and various bits and pieces stuck on it? Will it hurt your hand as it runs through? Is it made of something like rope, which is just going to give you rope burn if it pulls through the palms of your hands? So consider the material that it's made of. And I would consider ordering, there's a rubber version you can get from America. In America, long lines are very popular. In America they're called check cords, but that has nothing to do with checking your dog. They're just called check cords there. and they make them out of rubber, and they're really sort of non-slip, grippy, excellent long lines. So you might want to consider ordering them from abroad, and I'll give you some websites that you can look into it and some pictures of what they look like, and so you can look into that a bit more. So if you want to get the Puppy School long line, you can get it from me if you pop down to the hall on Friday evening, or you can get it online, and that's the website address for it there. It is 10 meters long, so it's the right length. It is made of a fabric material though, so it will be absorbent, and it likely will catch twigs and leaves and things like that. So these are the US Gundog check cords. And I think that this material, this sort of rubbery material, one type of it is called Tough Flex. So there's a link in the email that I'm going to send you, so if you want to look into that a bit more. And there's a website link here as well for it. So it's just a grippy rubber. It can't absorb anything, can't pull through your hands. Mud tends to fall off it, so you're not bringing loads of mud home all the time. You don't really need to wash it. It's just a good long line. And it's available in the US because they use them a lot more in America. Only pet dog owners tend to use long lines in the UK, whereas in America, all gun dog trainers tend to use them and call them check cords. So they're a lot more popular there. Okay, so using the equipment, every single time your dog is free, and would usually be off lead, from now on you must attach the long line to the harness. And the long line prevents the dog from gaining access to those environmental rewards we can't control. Remember, we can't put bunnies in our pockets and control them, but we can control the dog's access to them instead, interrupting access to those rewards. So we remove the rewards we can't control. So that's really quite important. The long line is not working in the way that we're making the dog do the thing we want. It's not that we call the dog, and if it doesn't come, we damn well make it come by reeling in that long line. So this is not like 1960s, 1950s dog training where we make the dog do the thing we want if it doesn't do it. That's not how I want you to conceive of the long line. How I want you to think about it is we are removing the reward in the environment. So if the dog is smelling some wee on a tree, we pull the dog away from that wee. So the dog cannot continue to be rewarded by smelling that wee. We remove that reward. We can't remove the wee because it's attached to the tree and it's outside our control, remember, but we can remove the dog from the wee. So that's what the purpose of the long line is for. And that's why it's important that you use it quite quickly, because if you call your dog and your dog doesn't come, it's rewarding itself in whatever it's doing. If it's playing with another dog, if it's eating horse poo, it is all that time rewarding itself, and you need to remove it from that reward as quickly as possible. Or you're rewarding the wrong behaviour, basically. So that's what the long line is for. It's not for pulling the dog to us really quickly and forcing it to come. It's to remove it from the environmental reward. So yes, stand near the end of the long line and don't allow it to get out of your reach. Remember, there's no point having a long line on your dog if your dog is 2 fields away with a long line attached. But don't keep hold of the end of it either. So it's not a lead. You don't want to walk around holding it. You just want to make sure the end of it is on the floor near your feet. Okay, so this is exercise 4, giant elastic recalls. So this is an exercise you do outside in the park now, and you're going to do it with your long line harness on. It requires 2 people, each with tasty treats, and each person must have practiced the previous super duper recall exercises indoors. So this is not an exercise that you can borrow a friend or a neighbour and ask them to help you with. It has to be someone who has practiced the recall with the dog before. So the dog is used to coming when this person calls. Otherwise, I mean, dogs often don't respond if they're called by someone they haven't been called by before, because the recalls sound a bit different. So it's important that whoever you use for this exercise has also done the previous exercises. Alright, so to start with, the 2 people separate, but you don't separate too far, not too far too fast. One person calls the dog using the super duper recall phrase. The dog runs to them and eats the treat. The other person calls the dog runs to them and eats the treat. The first person calls again, the dog runs to them, and so on. So you can see it's quite simple when it goes well. If the dog is successful, the two people can slowly separate further from each other, so the dog's being called over a greater distance as you do this exercise. If the dog ignores a recall and is distracted, the caller should run quickly to the dog and put the treat on the dog's nose, lowering the dog backwards a short distance and feeding the dog the treat. So the reason why quickly is underlined there is because we need to associate your super duper recall phrase with the behaviour that you want, which means that we have to get the behaviour quickly after the phrase. If we call the dog and then we slowly amble over to the dog with our treat, and finally when we get to the dog we put the treat on the dog's nose and we lower it backwards, the dog is going to have completely forgotten that you called. It's going to have done a million things between the time that you called and when you put the treat on its nose. It's going to have sniffed the grass and, I don't know, scratched its sides and, I don't know, all kinds of other things could have happened in those minutes between when you've called and when you've got to the dog. So it's important that after you call, if you think the dog is going to ignore you, if you give it 2 seconds, if it's just standing there doing nothing, or if it's distracted, run to it quickly and put the treat on its nose and lure it backwards to you. I get very frustrated in class when I see people walking very slowly to their dog when it hasn't come. You have to run fast after you've asked for behaviour. You have to get that behaviour. Alright, next point. The caller cannot easily use the long line in this exercise because with two people calling, the long line will be facing the wrong way. So if you just imagine for a moment two people who are calling the dog backwards and forwards between them, when someone calls, the long line is going to be at the feet of the previous person, so the person who called can't easily pick it up because it's not going to be at their feet. But the other person can help by using the long line to pull the dog away from whatever it's distracted by. So whoever's got the long line in reachable distance of them should grab it and use it to pull the dog away from that reward. Because remember, remove the reward. The dog is being rewarded all the time. It is interested in something else and it's not coming after you've called. So you need to remove it quickly from that thing it's distracted by. So whoever can grab the long line should just grab it and pull the dog away from whatever it's distracted by. Meanwhile, the caller should run forwards and put the treat on the dog's nose and get it to come backwards, lure it backwards a little way. So you should do this exercise at the beginning and the end of every walk this week for 10 repetitions. So doggy come, doggy comes, doggy come, doggy comes, doggy come, doggy comes for 10 repetitions at the beginning and again at the end of your walk. If you're struggling or if things are going wrong, these are some things you might want to think about. Are you too far apart? So are you standing too far apart too soon? You might want to try coming back a bit closer together. Are the treats tasty enough? I think we've said enough about tasty treats before now. Is the dog hungry enough or is it overweight? You might want to halve its food for a couple of days and see if that gives it a bit of an edge and a bit of a more interest in the treats. Are you removing the environmental rewards through use of the long line? So are you being quick enough to grab that long line and pull your dog away from whatever it's distracted by? Yes. Have you drilled the previous exercises enough? So if all else fails and you think you've done everything you should have done, it might be that you just haven't done the groundwork thoroughly enough and you might want to go back and revisit some of the exercises we've done in previous weeks and drill them a bit more around the house first and embed them a bit more in your dog's brain before you continue. So if you're by yourself, you can't do this exercise. And remember, you can't borrow someone for this exercise either, so you just won't be able to do it if you're by yourself. I'm sorry about that, but you'll just have to move on to the next exercise, which is exercise 5, recalls forever. So get exercise 4 started and running for a few days at the beginning and the end of your walks before you add exercise 5, which takes place during the walk itself. This exercise is called recalls forever because you continue to practice it for a very long time indeed. So here you go, this is it. Start your walk. Ensure the end of the long line is near your feet or reachable. Do not hold it. It should be slack. Call your dog using your super duper phrase. And remember, don't call it from something incredibly distracting to start with. We're calling it away from things which are not very distracting at all, maybe when it's already looked back at us, or when it's very close by. Not anything difficult yet. So call the dog using the super duper phrase. If the dog comes, reward with a tasty treat. Do this at least 10 times each walk. And remember, only call once. Do not repeat your recall. So yes, if the dog doesn't come and is distracted, do not call again. Quickly, remember, pick up the long line and reel the dog in. The long line is not only obtaining the behaviour you want, the dog coming back to you, but more importantly, it is removing the dog from the environmental reward. This is key. So that's the point that I mentioned earlier as being very important, that you need to be fast because you need to remove the dog from the source of the reward in the environment which it is accessing. So you need to pull it away quickly from whatever it's rewarding itself with. If the dog turns halfway back to you and comes to you willingly, the last bit, then reward that with a tasty treat. Remember, in reward-based training, when you give your dog a treat, you're rewarding the last thing the dog did. So if the last thing the dog did was turn and come back to you, you're rewarding that. Okay, so I think at this stage it's quite important that we make it easy enough for your dog to succeed enough of the time. So we're going to reward when it turns and comes back to you after it's been pulled halfway. If your dog has to be reeled backwards all the way to you and remains distracted, do not reward. Release the dog and call when the dog is nearer or when the distractions are fewer next time. So yes, if you have, if things go a bit pear-shaped and a bit wrong, you want to call when the dog is a bit closer to you and when the distractions are less. Make it easier. Manage the distractions and do not call if you think you won't succeed. Just reel the dog in without calling if the distractions are too high. So that's one of the most important things about being a successful dog trainer, is managing the distractions. And that means not asking your dog to do something if you don't think there's a really, really good chance your dog's going to do it. Because you don't want to give the dog the chance to learn it's possible to be called and not to come. So just don't call if you think your dog won't come. Just reel your dog in. So you're going to start with this really easy, where the dog's just looking at you anyway, when it's very near you, when the distractions are very low, and then if you have close to 100% success at that level, and you're calling your dog back 10 times every walk and letting it go again, then you might want to consider increasing the distractions slightly, so the dog's a bit further away, the dog's sniffing a plant, that sort of level of distraction, and then gradually increase from there. So don't go too far too fast, and don't call your dog back if it sees another dog and tries to run off and play, because it's very likely that your dog won't come, and that you'll be just associating your recall with the dog not responding instead. So don't even bother trying to call your dog from a really high distraction at this point. So how long for is something people often ask because they think the whole long line thing is a bit of a pain in the bum. So you will need to use the long line harness every single time your dog is free. And free means when it would usually be off lead. Otherwise, recalls will deteriorate when the dog reaches those environmental rewards and learns that you cannot prevent access to them when the long line is off. You are undoing all your training by walking your dog with the long line off. If you forget your long line, try not to use your super duper recall phrase on that walk. So this is absolutely incredibly important as well. If you, say, use your long line 95% of the time, but 5% of the time you forget it or you can't be bothered, then in that 5% of the time, your dog might ignore you on a walk when you call, and your dog will then learn that it's possible to do something else. And your dog will then become sort of what we can think of as being long line wise, so it learns the difference between wearing the long line and not wearing the long line. It learns, when I have this thing on my back, I'm not really free, I have to do what my owner says and what my owner wants, and I can't go and access all those rewards out there that I really want to. But when I'm not got this thing on my back, then I can do whatever I want. I don't have to do what my owner says at all. So then your dog's going to learn the difference between the long line being on and the long line being off. And that's why it's really important that you don't stop using the long line until your dog is no longer trying to ignore you, until it's no longer trying to go and play with other dogs, until it's not ever going to have that chance to learn it's possible to do what it wants. So it's really important that you use the long line to prevent your dog from learning what it's possible to do without it. So yeah, how long the process takes varies depending on individual dogs. As a rule of thumb, you should be able to recall your dog 10 times on a walk, away from any type of distraction, first time, successfully, for a week, before you consider not using your long line. And this can take as long as a year with 10 repetitions of recalls per walk. So this is a long-term training solution and something that you're going to have to commit yourself to doing for a long period of time. Once you remove the long line, continue to recall your dog several times a walk for a tasty treat to keep your recall drilled. And it's important to say that one reason why dogs stop coming when they're called is because owners start to only give the recall at the end of the walk when they want to put the lead on and go home. So they call their dog, and they may or may not give it a treat, and then they put the lead on and they go home. So the dog starts to think, well, I don't want to come anymore because every time I come, you put the lead on and it's the end of my walk. So I'd rather ignore you and stay free. Thank you very much. So one of the solutions for that is to keep calling a dog back during your walks as well. Even once you've finished your recall training and your long line harness are off, you want to keep calling a dog back during the walk, giving it a tasty treat and then telling it to go and play again. So the recall never comes to mean we're going home now. It just means come and get a treat, and maybe one time out of 5 you might go home when you call your dog, but it doesn't become necessarily associated with the recall phrase in any way. So yeah, this is your homework for this week. At the beginning and end of each walk, practice exercise 4, giant elastic recalls, for at least 10 repetitions. Do this for a few days before adding in exercise 5, recalls forever, whilst you're actually on each walk. If you have any problems, please post them to the Google group. And yeah, week 5 next week will be our final week.